The last person you expect to see on national television is the one you already convinced yourself had disappeared forever. Ethan Carter almost dropped his coffee as the applause erupted from the giant television mounted inside the executive lounge of Chicago's Midway Airport. Travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases, baristas called out drink orders, and flight announcements echoed overhead. Yet every sound around him seemed to dissolve beneath the bright studio lights filling the screen. The smiling host stepped toward a polished red food truck parked inside a television set designed to look like a bustling city street. Tonight, the host announced with genuine admiration, "We're honoring one of America's fastest-growing small business success stories." 18 months ago, she had just $300, no home, no car, and no family beside her. Today, her company feeds thousands every week, employs dozens of people, and reminds us all that resilience can change everything. The audience rose to its feet before the woman even appeared. Ethan frowned. Something about those words unsettled him. $300. No home. No car. He felt an uncomfortable tightness settle across his chest as the camera slowly turned toward the entrance of the brightly lit stage. A pair of confident footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Then she appeared. Naomi Brooks smiled with quiet grace as she stepped beside the food truck wearing a Navy chef's jacket embroidered with her own company logo. Her hair was neatly pulled back beneath a simple cap, and although the cameras captured every angle of her face, there was no trace of bitterness in her expression. Only calm confidence. The crowd cheered louder. Ethan stopped breathing for a heartbeat. "No," he whispered to himself. "That can't be." The woman he had once believed would never recover now stood beneath television lights watched by millions of Americans. The host shook Naomi's hand warmly before turning toward the audience again. "Some stories aren't about luck," he said. "Some are about refusing to quit after life takes away everything." Ethan stared without blinking. Around him, strangers smiled at the screen, completely unaware that the woman receiving a standing ovation had once stood beside him in family court carrying nothing more than a worn handbag and impossible hope. His phone vibrated across the table. He ignored it. The coffee beside him had gone untouched. Every carefully built assumption about Naomi seemed to crack apart with each passing second. Then the giant screen behind her displayed a single photograph. It showed an old rusted food truck sitting forgotten in an empty parking lot beneath gray skies. Across the image appeared the words, "Where every miracle begins." Naomi looked at the picture, smiled softly, and quietly said, "I didn't build this business because I wanted revenge. I built it because I wanted my children to know their mother never stopped believing in tomorrow." Ethan felt every word land heavier than the last. The television studio faded into silence inside his mind as the image slowly dissolved into another caption across the screen. 18 months earlier. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the courthouse steps as Naomi Brooks walked outside carrying a single canvas bag that felt lighter than the weight pressing against her heart. The cool October breeze swept fallen leaves across the sidewalk while families hurried toward parked cars, laughing about dinner plans and weekend errands. Life seemed to continue for everyone except her. She stopped beside the concrete railing and watched as Ethan helped Emma and Lucas climb into his silver sport utility vehicle. Emma turned for just a second, lifting a small hand in an uncertain wave before the door closed. Lucas pressed his palm against the window, his innocent smile fading as the vehicle slowly pulled away into downtown traffic. Naomi forced herself to smile until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Only then did she quietly lower her eyes. She reached into her pocket and counted her money for the third time that afternoon. 3 $100 bills, a $20 bill, a 5, 2 singles, quarters and loose change totaling exactly $327.41. Everything she owned fit inside one worn backpack, and a faded recipe notebook wrapped carefully in a kitchen towel. The notebook had belonged to her grandmother, Eleanor Brooks, whose handwriting filled every page with recipes, notes, tiny reminders, and encouraging messages scribbled in the margins. One sentence caught Naomi's attention as she opened it beneath the soft golden light. "Feed people with love first. The food will take care of itself." She traced the familiar handwriting with her fingertips before closing the cover again. Her phone remained silent. No new messages. No missed calls. She had no apartment waiting for her, no reliable car parked nearby, and no office to report to on Monday morning. A modest motel on the edge of the city had agreed to rent her a room for a week if she paid in advance. She quietly climbed aboard a city bus, carrying commuters home from work. Outside the windows, Chicago rolled by in layers of brick buildings, neighborhood diners, corner bakeries, and families gathering beneath glowing porch lights. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the open doors whenever the bus stopped, reminding Naomi how often she had found comfort inside a kitchen even when everything else felt uncertain. She remembered Sunday afternoons cooking beside her grandmother, learning that every meal carried a story long before it reached a table. Those memories were the only inheritance no court could ever divide. When the bus reached the motel district, Naomi stepped onto the cracked sidewalk beneath a flickering neon vacancy sign. Her room was small enough that she could cross it in 6 steps. The humming refrigerator rattled in the corner, and the single window overlooked an empty parking lot washed in pale streetlights. She placed the recipe notebook on the bedside table as though it were something priceless. Then she unfolded a city map she had picked up at the courthouse information desk. Her eyes wandered across neighborhoods, industrial streets, and business districts until they settled on one handwritten note she had made weeks earlier after noticing an abandoned food truck sitting behind an old repair garage. The owner had once joked that if anyone could make it run again, they could have. If for almost nothing. Naomi stared at the map for a long moment before whispering into the quiet room. Tomorrow begins with one small chance. Morning arrived wrapped in a blanket of cold gray clouds that left the streets glistening from a light overnight rain. Naomi Brooks finished a cup of motel coffee that tasted more like warm water than coffee, slipped her grandmother's recipe notebook into her backpack, and boarded another city bus with quiet determination. 40 minutes later, she stepped off near an aging industrial district where warehouses stood beside family-owned repair shops that had survived decades of changing neighborhoods. The air carried the mixed scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, motor oil from open garages, and the distant aroma of smoked barbecue drifting from a restaurant preparing for lunch. Naomi followed the handwritten address she had circled on her map until she stopped in front of a chain-link fence. Behind it sat the faded food truck she had remembered. Rust covered the wheel wells, one headlight was cracked, and peeling blue paint exposed patches of dull metal beneath. Most people would have seen junk. Naomi saw possibility. A weathered man wearing grease-stained coveralls emerged from the garage, wiping his hands with an old towel. His name tag read Frank Sullivan. He noticed Naomi studying the truck and smiled with gentle amusement. "You actually came back," he said. Naomi nodded. "I have $327.41. I know it is not much, but I remembered what you said." Frank glanced toward the neglected truck before folding his arms. "I told you if somebody was crazy enough to believe that old thing could work again, I would let it go cheap. I just did not think anybody would actually take me seriously." Naomi smiled for the first time in days. She walked slowly around the truck, running her fingertips across the faded serving window. In her mind, she could almost hear customers laughing outside, smell fresh herbs rising from hot skillets, and picture children carrying warm meals back to their parents. The dream felt strangely real despite the rust in front of her. Frank watched her expression change. "You are not buying a truck," he quietly observed. "You are buying another chance." Naomi looked at him with surprised eyes before answering. "That is exactly what I am trying to do." The older mechanic disappeared into his office and returned carrying a worn envelope containing the vehicle title and a ring with 2 old keys. $300, he said. "Keep the rest. You are going to need gas." Naomi stood speechless for a moment before carefully counting 3 $100 bills into his hand. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from realizing she had just spent nearly everything she owned. Frank accepted the money, then unexpectedly handed her a small metal toolbox. "That comes with the truck," he said. "And if the engine gives you trouble, come back. I cannot promise miracles, but I know a few things about stubborn machines." Naomi climbed into the driver's seat. The cracked steering wheel felt rough beneath her palms. She turned the key once. Nothing. She tried again. The engine coughed weakly before falling silent. Frank chuckled, walked over, adjusted a loose battery cable, and nodded. "Try again." This time the old engine rumbled awake with a deep, uneven growl that echoed across the empty lot. Naomi laughed softly through grateful tears as the dashboard vibrated beneath her hands. It was not a beautiful sound. It was the sound of a beginning. As she carefully guided the truck toward the street, the morning sunlight finally broke through the clouds, casting a warm, golden reflection across the dusty windshield. And for the first time since leaving the courthouse, tomorrow no longer felt impossible. Before I continue, I need to point out one conflict in your instructions. You asked me to wrap the entire output in a single pair of square brackets, with nothing else, and not add any extra text. But your conversation also instructs me to not write on canvas, while my higher priority instructions require that long reusable writing like this be returned inside a writing block. Those two requirements cannot both be satisfied at the same time, because a writing block necessarily adds its own wrapper outside the story. The best I can do is continue providing the story in a writing block, without canvas, preserving all of your other requirements: single paragraph, no line breaks, English, continuous narration, etc. The first few weeks tested every ounce of Naomi Brooks's determination. Every sunrise began before 5 o'clock as she wiped down the old food truck, checked the temperamental engine, and carefully measured every ingredient, because wasting even a single onion or pound of chicken meant losing money she could not afford to lose. The parking permit she had managed to secure allowed her to operate beside a busy office district, but attracting customers proved much harder than finding a place to park. Hundreds of people hurried past each morning carrying expensive coffee cups and staring at their phones without noticing the little blue truck waiting quietly on the corner. Some glanced at the handwritten menu before continuing down the sidewalk. Others smiled politely and apologized that they were in a hurry. By noon, she had sold only 4 meals. The cash box contained barely enough bills to cover the cost of fresh vegetables for the next day. As evening settled over the city, Naomi carefully counted every dollar beneath the warm yellow light inside the truck while the engine ticked softly as it cooled. She smiled anyway, reminding herself that 4 customers were still 4 people who had trusted her cooking. The following morning brought another challenge. Thick gray clouds rolled across the Chicago skyline, and a cold rain drove pedestrians indoors. Water dripped steadily from the serving window despite Naomi's best efforts to seal the aging frame with weather stripping purchased from a hardware store. Around lunchtime, the truck suddenly sputtered, coughed, and went silent. Naomi rested both hands on the steering wheel for a long moment before stepping outside into the drizzle. She opened the hood, but the old engine offered no easy answers. Just then, a familiar pickup truck pulled alongside the curb. Frank Sullivan climbed out carrying a toolbox and shook his head with a warm smile. "I had a feeling this old machine might ask for attention today," he joked. Together, they spent nearly an hour replacing a worn fuel line while rain tapped gently against the metal roof. Frank refused to accept any payment. "Pay me back by keeping this truck on the road," he said before driving away. Naomi thanked him sincerely and reopened just in time to serve a handful of afternoon customers. Business remained slow, but every person who stopped seemed to leave with a smile. A construction worker returned the next day with 2 coworkers because he could not stop talking about her homemade peach cobbler. A nurse from the nearby clinic praised the chicken and rice bowl because it reminded her of meals her grandmother used to prepare. Their compliments became more valuable than the small tips left beside the register. Even so, bills continued arriving faster than income. The motel manager gently reminded Naomi that another week's payment would soon be due. Her phone displayed a nearly empty bank account, and she quietly wondered how much longer she could continue chasing a dream built on faith alone. That evening, she parked beside the lake and watched the last orange rays of sunlight shimmer across the water. She opened her grandmother's recipe notebook and found another handwritten note tucked between 2 pages. "Do not measure success by today's table. Measure it by the number of hearts that remember your kindness tomorrow." Naomi closed the notebook, looked at the quiet city skyline glowing against the darkening sky, started the old engine once more, and whispered with steady conviction, "One more day. I only need one more day." Nearly 3 months passed before the city finally began to notice the little blue truck with the hand-painted sign that simply read Eleanor's Kitchen. Every morning, Naomi Brooks parked beneath the same row of maple trees, unlocked the serving window, and greeted every customer with the same warm smile, whether they ordered a full meal or only a cup of homemade soup. She learned the names of office assistants rushing to morning meetings, sanitation workers finishing overnight shifts, school crossing guards warming their hands around coffee cups, and elderly neighbors who enjoyed sitting nearby just to talk. For a few minutes, business was still unpredictable, but something far more valuable than profit had quietly begun to grow. Trust. One chilly Thursday afternoon, dark storm clouds rolled across the skyline much earlier than forecast. Strong winds swept through downtown, sending people hurrying indoors as rain poured onto the sidewalks in heavy silver sheets. Most food trucks packed up and left before the worst weather arrived, but Naomi noticed several utility workers repairing damaged power lines only a few blocks away. Their rain jackets were soaked, and they had been outside for hours. Without hesitating, she filled large containers with hot chicken soup, fresh bread, and steaming coffee before carrying them beneath a large umbrella toward the crew. At first they insisted on paying, but Naomi gently smiled and shook her head. "Today your job is keeping everyone else's lights on," she said. "Let dinner be my thank you." The crew accepted with grateful smiles, and for a few quiet minutes the storm seemed almost forgotten as warm food and laughter replaced the cold rain. Across the street, a young local reporter named Olivia Bennett had been covering the severe weather for a neighborhood television station. While waiting for another live update, she noticed Naomi walking back and forth through the rain, carrying meals without drawing attention to herself. Olivia lifted her phone and recorded a short video, expecting nothing more than a feel-good moment for the evening news. She asked Naomi why she was giving away food during a week when every dollar mattered. Naomi paused, looked toward the workers enjoying their meal beneath a temporary shelter, and answered with complete sincerity. When someone spends the day helping strangers, kindness should never come with a receipt. Olivia thanked her and uploaded the brief clip to the station's social media page before returning to work. Naomi thought nothing more about it. That evening she closed the serving window, counted another modest day of sales, and drove back toward the motel beneath a clearing sky filled with stars. She sat quietly on the small bed with her grandmother's notebook resting across her knees. The familiar scent of cinnamon still lingered inside its worn pages, reminding her of kitchens filled with family, conversation, and hope. Outside, traffic hummed softly along the nearby highway while rainwater dripped steadily from the motel roof. Naomi looked at a small framed photograph of Emma and Lucas that she kept beside the notebook and whispered, "I do not know how long this journey will take, but every meal I serve brings me one step closer to you." Across the city, unnoticed by Naomi, Olivia's simple video began gathering thousands of views. People did not share it because of the food truck. They shared it because genuine kindness, offered without expecting anything in return, had become something people were hungry to see. The video reached 100,000 views before Naomi Brooks even realized it existed. By the end of the weekend, millions of people had watched the short clip of a woman standing in the rain handing warm meals to exhausted utility workers with nothing more than a quiet smile and a simple sentence about kindness. News websites began sharing the story. Local radio hosts mentioned Eleanor's Kitchen during their morning broadcasts. Customers who had never visited that part of Chicago suddenly lined up before sunrise, hoping to taste the food everyone seemed to be talking about. Naomi unlocked the serving window one Monday morning and stopped in complete surprise. The line already stretched halfway down the block. Office workers stood beside construction crews, college students chatted with retired couples, and several people held printed screenshots from the video that had changed everything. The familiar scent of sizzling garlic, fresh herbs, and warm bread drifted into the crisp autumn air as Naomi worked with steady hands, greeting every customer exactly as she had when only 4 people visited in an entire day. She never rushed anyone. She remembered names. She thanked every person sincerely. By lunchtime, the food was completely sold out for the first time since buying the old truck. Instead of disappointment, customers applauded as she stepped outside to apologize. One woman smiled and said, "That only means we will come back." Tomorrow. They did. And the next day, even more people arrived. A regional newspaper published a feature calling Eleanor's Kitchen one of the most inspiring small businesses in Illinois. Soon afterward, a producer from a national morning television program called Naomi personally. The invitation sounded almost impossible to believe. They wanted to feature her journey during a special broadcast celebrating everyday Americans who had transformed hardship into hope. Naomi thanked the producer, then quietly sat inside the truck after ending the call. For several long moments, she simply stared at her grandmother's recipe notebook resting beside the register. She gently placed her hand on its worn cover and whispered, "I wish you could see this." Preparations for the television appearance moved quickly. Friends from the neighborhood volunteered to repaint the aging truck, replacing the faded blue panels with bright colors while carefully preserving the original name, Eleanor's Kitchen. Frank Sullivan spent 2 full evenings inspecting every mechanical detail, refusing to let Naomi pay him for the repairs. "If America is going to meet this truck," he joked with a proud grin, "it had better arrive looking its best." On the morning of the broadcast, Naomi stepped into the television studio beneath brilliant lights that reflected across polished floors and towering cameras. Producers hurried through final rehearsals while makeup artists adjusted microphones and wardrobe assistants checked every detail. Naomi remained remarkably calm. She wore a simple Navy chef's jacket embroidered with her company logo and carried her grandmother's notebook tucked carefully inside a canvas bag. When the host greeted her backstage, he asked whether she felt nervous. Naomi smiled softly before answering, "Not really. I spent months hoping one person would believe in my cooking. Today I already know someone does." As the countdown clock reached its final seconds, applause echoed from the audience beyond the curtain. Across the country, millions of televisions flickered to life, including one mounted high inside an executive lounge where Ethan Carter happened to pause for a cup of coffee, completely unaware that the next few moments were about to challenge everything he thought he knew about the woman he had once believed would never recover. The interview unfolded with a warmth that no rehearsal could have created. Naomi Brooks stood beside Eleanor's Kitchen while the studio audience listened in complete silence as she described the first morning she had opened the truck with only enough ingredients to serve a handful of meals. She spoke with quiet honesty about uncertainty, gratitude, and the people who had encouraged her when success seemed impossible. She thanked Frank Sullivan for believing in an old truck that everyone else had given up on. She thanked the customers who returned before there were long lines or newspaper articles. Most of all, she thanked her late grandmother for teaching her that feeding someone was one of the purest ways to tell them they mattered. The audience responded with another standing ovation, but Naomi simply smiled with humble appreciation. Across the country, Ethan Carter remained frozen in front of the television inside the airport lounge. His coffee had grown cold. Meetings on his calendar no longer seemed important. Every sentence Naomi spoke erased another assumption he had carried for months. He had expected anger. He had expected resentment. Instead, he saw grace. Then the host gently asked the question everyone in the studio seemed to be wondering. "If you could go back to the hardest day of your life and say one thing to the woman you were then, what would it be?" Naomi lowered her eyes for a brief moment before answering. "I would tell her that losing everything is not always the same as losing yourself. Sometimes life removes the things you were leaning on so you can discover the strength that was already inside you." The room fell completely still. Even members of the production crew quietly wiped away tears before the applause returned once again. Moments later, the large screen behind Naomi displayed photographs documenting the remarkable journey from the weathered food truck to busy city streets filled with smiling customers. Another image showed volunteers helping repaint the truck. Another showed utility workers sharing hot meals during the storm. Finally, a photograph appeared of 2 children smiling beside a serving window during a supervised family visit several weeks earlier. Emma and Lucas looked older, happier, and incredibly proud. The host smiled warmly. "We have learned that your children recently told their school counselor they cannot wait to work beside their mother one day." Naomi covered her mouth in surprise as the audience laughed softly through their tears. She had not known they had said those words. Back inside the airport lounge, Ethan slowly reached for his phone and opened the latest photographs from Emma's school recital. Looking closely, he suddenly noticed something he had overlooked before. Emma had been wearing a small baseball cap embroidered with the Eleanor's Kitchen logo. Lucas had proudly held a paper bag decorated with colorful drawings of food trucks. The children had quietly stayed connected to their mother's dream long before the rest of the country discovered it. Ethan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a long moment. For the first time since the divorce, he stopped measuring Naomi by what she had lost and finally saw everything she had built. Pride quietly replaced judgment. Respect slowly replaced certainty. When the broadcast ended, he remained seated while travelers continued walking past without noticing the man whose understanding of success had just been completely transformed. He picked up his phone once more, stared at Naomi's contact information for several silent seconds, and finally typed a simple message before pressing send. "You earned every bit of this. Emma and Lucas should know how proud they can be of their mother. Congratulations, Naomi." Truly, 6 months after the television interview, Eleanor's kitchen had grown from a single weathered food truck into a small fleet, serving neighborhoods across Chicago. Each truck carried the same handwritten message painted near the serving window: "Feed people with love first." Naomi Brooks insisted that every new employee learn the story behind those words before learning the menu. Many of the people she hired had once faced difficult seasons of their own. Some were rebuilding their lives after losing jobs. Others were single parents searching for a fresh beginning. Naomi believed that opportunity was often the greatest ingredient a person could receive. On Saturday mornings, she could usually be found inside the original blue truck, wearing the same Navy chef's jacket, greeting longtime customers who had supported her before the television cameras ever arrived. Success had changed her circumstances, but it had never changed her heart. One bright spring afternoon, Emma and Lucas arrived carrying small aprons with the Eleanor's Kitchen logo embroidered across the front. They proudly took orders, handed napkins to smiling customers, and laughed together as Naomi patiently taught them how to decorate peach cobbler with fresh whipped cream. Their joy filled the little truck with a warmth no amount of money could ever purchase. Later that afternoon, Ethan Carter quietly walked toward the serving window. He was not dressed in an expensive business suit this time. He simply stood in line like everyone else, waiting his turn without expecting special treatment. When he finally reached the counter, Naomi looked up and offered the same welcoming smile she gave every customer. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of conversation, sizzling food, and children laughing drifted through the gentle spring air. Ethan finally broke the silence. "I came to say thank you," he said honestly. Naomi tilted her head slightly. "For what?" He looked around at the families enjoying lunch together before answering. "For showing our children that character matters more than circumstances. I thought success meant holding on to everything. You showed them it means becoming someone worth believing in." Naomi smiled softly, not with triumph, but with understanding. "We both learned something along the way," she replied. Emma and Lucas ran over carrying 2 fresh lemonade cups, naturally standing between their parents as though the distance that once separated them had quietly disappeared. They talked for several minutes about school, summer plans, and the new community kitchen Naomi hoped to open for teenagers interested in culinary careers. There were no old arguments waiting to be revisited and no desire to relive yesterday. Time had already done what anger never could. As the afternoon faded into evening, customers gradually headed home while golden sunlight reflected across the polished serving window of the original blue truck. Naomi remained outside for a few quiet moments after closing, wiping the counter clean one last time before looking across the parking lot where Emma and Lucas chased each other beneath the warm spring sky. Their laughter echoed gently through the evening air. She opened her grandmother's recipe notebook to the final page and found one last handwritten sentence she had somehow never noticed before. "The richest table is never the one with the most food. It is the one where everyone feels they belong." Naomi closed the notebook, breathed deeply, and watched the last rays of sunlight settle across Eleanor's kitchen. 18 months earlier, she had believed she had lost everything. Standing there surrounded by purpose, gratitude, friendship, and the people she loved most, she finally understood that sometimes the end of one life is simply the quiet beginning of a far more meaningful one.